Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's the CJ. Let's go ahead and jump right to this update. I've been delaying this long enough, and I've finally set aside some time to, get my hands in the tank and deal with these nuisance, issues that's been happening over the last few weeks. Starting with the coralline algae that's been slowly taking over my glass, especially the curved portion of my tank. And also, the bubble algae that's been growing on my gyro pump for the last few months. Not to mention some of the corals that have been knocked over and, by me, by the cleanup crew, and just kind of laying around in places they don't belong. So, it's going to be kind of a action update, if you want to call it that. It's going to bring you guys along for the ride. So let's go ahead and get to it. So for those that are curious, this is exactly what I mean by coralline algae taking over my glass. Specifically the curved portion of the JBJ. Most normal tanks just have a seam here with silicone that you can just kind of scrape along, maybe with, a flipper or whatever other tool you want to use. But trust me when I tell you this curved glass, there's no other way to get this clean besides good old, old-fashioned getting your hands in the tank with a razor blade and just getting to work. So with that being said, I really try my best to avoid doing this at all. I would say it's been roughly 8 months or so since I've actually had to put my hands in the tank and scrape it with this razor blade. So for the most part, my tool of choice is going to be my good old-fashioned extension rod that I purchased from my LFS. It actually came with a kit. I believe it had a foam brush with it, a plastic scraper for acrylic, the metal scraper, and another tool. I actually forgot the name of it, but not only does it come with those tools, it's extendable, so it really does a great job of letting me, get to general areas of my tank without putting my hands in the tank, because we all know the less you have your hands in the tank in this hobby, the better. Now, even though I have all those different, maintenance tools, extension poles, scrapers, razors, all that good stuff, still not going to be my number one option. I would say my number one preventative measure, at least that I've been using over the last year or so, it's going to be my mag float and my paper towel. I know you guys may be wondering, why the paper towel? Well, it gives you the 2-for-1. As long as you keep that paper towel between the magnet and the glass, it cleans the outside of your tank the same time you're cleaning the inside of your tank. Replace it as needed, but trust me guys, this is definitely the best thing I've ever done. And doing this, every other day has really kept the build up from even building up at all, and really helped to buy me those weeks and months that I've been able to get away with. So the next problem we're going to deal with is going to be my Maxspect Gyre. But before we can do anything, we got to make sure we kill the power to the controller, and then we can take advantage of the quick disconnect. Now I point this out because, it's one of those items on the pump that a lot of people overlook. But when it comes time for maintenance and actually removing the pump from the tank, not having to remove the controller and the power supply and any of the other, adapters that come with it really makes life a lot easier. So I just wanted to mention that. So with that being said, let me show you guys the horror that's been kind of growing on the glass and growing behind my pump. So let me give you guys a quick look at just how bad this bubble algae problem was becoming. Not only was it kind of growing and taking over the power cord from the gyro, but it was also starting to kind of wedge and encrust in between the pump, the motor housing, the impellers, all of that stuff. It was just a matter of time before one of these bubbles burst, got spread through the tank with the gyro's flow pattern, and caused some kind of, bubble algae epidemic in my system. Now, I do have to admit, I was a little nervous about this coming off the pump, especially when I compare it to, my past experience removing this bubble algae from corals. It was hard and crusted and just didn't want to let go, but it was not the same situation. Maybe it's because this is plastic and the corals, had a skeleton for it to grab onto, but nevertheless, I'm glad it just fell right off. Now, I did make an interesting discovery while cleaning this pump out. It's going to be this baby Trochus snail. Now, this is my first time seeing this in my tank. Now, that's the good news. I have snails breeding. The bad news is one of these little guys could crawl inside the gyro, trap the impeller, and cause it to burn out. So definitely got to keep an eye on this situation moving forward. first started this hobby, I used to constantly move corals in my first reef tank, and that led to, all kinds of broken frags, things in the wrong place, and just all kinds of chaos. So I've learned to, keep my hands out of the tank. So with that being said, there's really only 3 reasons I touch anything in my system now. The first one, coral warfare. The second, corals being broken by me from cleaning. And the third, cleanup crew knocking something off a rock. So all 3 of those situations end up happening in this case. So I had to get my hands in the tank. So anytime I have my hands in the tank to the extent I did today, especially scraping the glass, which took a long time, gluing those corals, stressing my corals out, they're releasing mucus and the fish are stressed out. All those things add up to a water change in my eyes. I would like to dilute, for one, anything that may have been on my skin, any kind of soap or, chemicals or anything that could harm my tank. And also, it just helps put everything at ease. Fresh water is always a good thing in a reef tank. Now at this point, I know some of you guys may be wondering, what do you do for the outside of your tank? How do you keep it so clean? Well, this is it, guys. I've been using this same bottle for the life of my system. What you're looking at is 3 parts RODI water, 1 part vinegar. This isn't anything new in the hobby. It's something that's talked about on all the forums. A lot of people use this solution, but it's just pretty much all I've used, guys. I spray this on the tank as needed, wipe it down with some paper towels, and just keep it moving. You got to be really careful in this hobby with the chemicals you spray on your glass, because there's always the potential of it entering your tank. So, Windex is one of those things people always say never use. Not only that, I even make sure that the wife or the kids, no one even sprays any air freshener or anything in the living room around my tank, because not only do glass cleaning products, hurt your tank, but even air fresheners could potentially hurt your tank. So just keep that in mind when it comes to tank maintenance. Be careful what you have spraying in the air. So at this point, I will say this maintenance day is completed. I've finally gotten rid of all of that coralline algae, and I'm really looking forward to, what the tank looks like when all this dust and debris settles, and everything is crystal clear like I like. And I'm really looking forward to, shooting an extra video. I'm thinking I may even put out a 4K video of the tank. Since everything is looking so clean and crispy, I'm really looking forward to seeing how that looks. Definitely glad I got my hands in the tank and finally did this maintenance. But am I looking forward to doing it again? Hell no. So just kind of keep that in mind. Preventative maintenance is the key. Make sure you clean your glass often, so that way you don't have the big cleanup later. But other than that, I think it's a good stopping point here, guys. So, hey, as always, you guys like, comment, subscribe. You guys do what y'all do. Y'all be easy. Happy reefing.